People call Pisces weak because weakness is the easiest label to give someone who still feels too sensitive, too emotional, too soft for this world. But let's be honest about what that really means. What they're actually saying is this: Pisces reacts to things other people have spent years training themselves not to notice. And that makes people uncomfortable. Because a Pisces can walk into a room and feel the tension before anyone says a word. They can hear sadness hiding inside a joke. They can sense when someone is pretending to be fine, when a relationship is quietly dying, when anger is really fear, when confidence is really performance, when silence is carrying more truth than speech ever could. And while everyone else keeps moving like everything is normal, Pisces is already carrying what the room refuses to admit. So no, Pisces is not weak. Pisces is what happens when a person stays emotionally open in a world that survives by becoming numb. That is not fragility. That is exposure. And exposure is expensive. Most people only deal with what touches them directly. Their own pain, their own stress, their own conflict, their own needs. But Pisces does not experience life through clean emotional borders. They absorb what is spoken, what is unspoken, what is hidden, what is denied, and what is trying desperately not to be seen. That is why people misunderstand them so easily. They think Pisces is overreacting, when Pisces is often reacting to more than anyone else in the room has even registered. That is the difference. Other people hear words. Pisces hears what the words are covering. Other people see behavior. Pisces feels what the behavior is protecting. Other people notice the event. Pisces senses the emotional weather around it. And that sounds beautiful when someone turns it into poetry. It sounds mystical, deep, almost romantic. But living like that is exhausting. Because when you feel what others ignore, life becomes heavy very fast. A simple conversation is not simple to Pisces if there is pain underneath it. A normal day is not normal if the atmosphere feels wrong. A friendship is not easy if resentment is growing behind politeness. A crowded room is not just noise and movement. It is pressure, masks, longing, insecurity, tension, loneliness, ego, and unspoken hurt moving all at once. Pisces does not just enter spaces. They absorb them. That is why they need to disappear sometimes. And this is where people get them wrong again. When Pisces pulls away, people call them moody, dramatic, escapist, unstable. But most of the time, Pisces is not running away from responsibility. They are trying to recover from emotional overload. They have taken in too much for too long. Too many moods that were not theirs. Too many silent cries no one named. Too many people pretending. Too many hidden fractures inside ordinary moments. Too much pain leaking through voices, faces, and pauses. At some point, their system gets flooded. And when that happens, Pisces does what they have always done. They retreat. Not because they do not care. Because they care so deeply that staying exposed any longer starts to feel like drowning. That is one of the hardest truths about Pisces. The same openness that makes them compassionate also makes them vulnerable to saturation. They are often the person who understands everyone else, while almost no one understands the cost of being them. And that cost grows even heavier because Pisces has a gift that can easily become a trap. They see the wound beneath the behavior. When someone is rude, most people react to the rudeness. Pisces sees the hurt behind it. When someone is controlling, most people see the control. Pisces feels the fear underneath it. When someone lashes out, most people react to the anger. Pisces notices the helplessness buried inside it. When someone goes cold, most people assume distance. Pisces senses disappointment, shame, grief, or exhaustion hiding below the surface. This is what makes Pisces so compassionate. They do not rush to judge. They do not reduce people to their worst moment. They can see humanity in people others have already written off. They understand contradictions. They recognize pain in places most people only see damage. But this is also where their life can become dangerous. Because when you always see the pain behind the harm, you start excusing what should have been confronted. You say, they didn't mean it, even though it still hurt you. You say, they're just going through a lot, even though they are taking it out on you. You say, I understand why they did that, while ignoring what it is doing to your own spirit. This is the part people never talk about. Pisces does not suffer because they feel too little protection from the world. Pisces suffers because they often understand too much before they protect themselves. That changes everything. Other people leave after the betrayal. Pisces sometimes stays long enough to understand all the reasons behind it. Other people see the damage and walk away. Pisces sees the broken child, the fear, the loneliness, the insecurity, the history, the wound. And sometimes that deeper understanding delays the boundary that should have happened sooner. That is not simple foolishness. That is empathy without armor. That is compassion without enough distance. That is love with the door still open long after the room became unsafe. And for a while, Pisces can even mistake that suffering for purpose. They can start believing that their softness exists to heal everyone, hold everything together, absorb every shock, and love people through wounds they have no intention of fixing. Until one day, the cost becomes too obvious to ignore. Until their silence becomes too full, their body becomes too tired, their spirit becomes too crowded, their kindness starts feeling like self-erasure. And that is where Pisces changes. Not loudly, but completely. Because once Pisces realizes that compassion is being used as a hiding place for other people's dysfunction, their heartbreak becomes clarity. And that clarity is one of the strongest things this sign ever develops. Pisces begins to understand that they were never meant to carry everyone, never meant to translate every silence, rescue every wounded soul, or stay available for every emotionally unfinished person who mistakes being understood for being entitled to access. That realization is a turning point. Because people think Pisces is weak until Pisces stops bleeding for things that were never theirs to heal. Then suddenly, the same softness people underestimated becomes something else entirely. Discernment. Pisces starts to see that feeling deeply does not mean belonging to every pain they detect. Understanding someone does not mean enduring them. Sensing a wound does not mean volunteering to be medicine. Loving someone does not mean becoming the place where they leave all the damage they refuse to face. That is when Pisces grows into their real power. Not by becoming colder, not by becoming harder, not by becoming less compassionate, but by becoming selective. And that is a huge difference. Because Pisces was never meant to become numb in order to survive. Pisces was meant to learn how to stay open without staying unprotected. That is the lesson. That is the evolution. That is the part people miss when they reduce this sign to dreaminess and tears. And speaking of dreaminess, people get that wrong too. They say Pisces escapes reality. They say Pisces lives in fantasy. They say Pisces drifts because they cannot handle real life. But that is not the truth. Pisces imagines because reality often enters them too harshly in its raw form. They create beauty because ugliness reaches them too easily. They create art because ordinary language cannot hold everything they feel. They create inner worlds because the outer world rarely explains what they are sensing. That is not childish. That is not denial. That is transformation. Pisces takes pain and turns it into music, image, tenderness, intuition, symbolism, and meaning. They take emotional chaos and make it survivable. They take the weight of life and convert it into something softer without pretending the weight was never there. That is not weakness. That is emotional alchemy. And still, for all this depth, Pisces often carries a very specific kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of having no one around. The loneliness of being deeply surrounded and still not deeply seen. Because Pisces understands people quickly. They can feel what others need, what others fear, what others are hiding, and what others are too proud to say out loud. They become the safe space, the listener, the comfort, the person who notices before anyone asks. But very few people ask what Pisces is carrying in return. Very few people realize that behind the calm voice, kind eyes, and gentle presence is someone who has been reading emotional weather all day long. Very few people understand that Pisces is not vague because there is nothing there. Pisces can seem hard to explain because there is too much there. Too many layers. Too many impressions. Too many signals arriving at once. Too much truth being felt all at the same time. How do you explain a sadness that did not start in you, but passed through you anyway? How do you explain being exhausted by a room, not an event? How do you explain sensing endings before evidence appears? How do you explain that a person's tone felt heavier than their words? Most people cannot hear that language. Pisces lives in it. And that is why this sign unsettles people. Because Pisces quietly exposes something the world does not want to admit. A lot of what gets praised as strength is actually disconnection. A lot of what gets called maturity is just emotional shutdown with good branding. A lot of what gets labeled as toughness is simply becoming less reachable, less affected, less human. Pisces challenges that without even trying. Their existence asks a dangerous question. What if sensitivity is not weakness? What if the real weakness is needing to go numb just to function? What if the people we call strong are sometimes just better at ignoring what hurts? Pisces does not let the world hide from those questions for long. That is why they are misunderstood. They are not weak because they feel too much. They are exhausting to the world because they reveal how much everyone else avoids feeling. And yes, that openness comes with a price. Pisces can trust too long, give too much, stay too available, confuse insight with obligation, mistake compassion for responsibility, delay boundaries because they want to understand before they judge. But none of that means they are broken. It means they have to learn that softness without protection becomes suffering. And once Pisces learns that, everything changes. They still feel deeply, but they no longer volunteer to drown. They still understand pain, but they stop building homes inside other people's chaos. They still sense what is unspoken, but they no longer treat every signal like a command to sacrifice themselves. That is mastery. A person who can still feel everything without belonging to everything. A person who can read pain without being consumed by it. A person who can stay tender without staying available for destruction. That is Pisces at their highest. So if you have ever called Pisces too sensitive, ask yourself something harder. Were they weak? Or were they responding to a reality you were too defended to notice? And if you are a Pisces listening to this, hear this clearly. You were never broken for feeling deeply. You were never flawed for needing space. You were never wrong for sensing what other people missed. Your sensitivity was never the problem. The real problem was being taught to treat your gift like a defect. You do not need to become numb to become strong. You need boundaries strong enough to protect what you feel. Because Pisces was never meant to be emotionless. Pisces was meant to remain human in a world that keeps rewarding emotional absence. And that changes everything. If this perspective made you feel seen, challenged how you think about Pisces, or put words to something you have felt for a long time, like the video, share it with someone who still mistakes sensitivity for weakness, and subscribe if you want astrology that goes deeper than stereotypes and tells the truth people usually avoid.